And now it's time for Omniversica, the greatest show on the internet, with your hosts, Dan Schneider and Art Durkee.
Welcome to Omniversica. On this show, we are going to be talking about science and some of the more fringe aspects of it. And our first guest is a woman named Dr. Fiorella Terenzi, and she's most noted for being an astronomer and recording the pulses and sounds of the universe and putting them on a CD that actually sold quite well. And I'm going to turn it over to Arthur Durkee, who knows a bit more about her career. Art?
Hi, this is Art Durkee. Our guest this week is astrophysicist, author, and recording artist Dr. Fiorella Terenzi, who received her doctorate in physics from the University of Milan, has studied opera and composition at the Conservatory Giuseppe Verdi in Corsi Serrali, and taught mathematics and physics at Liceo Scientifico in Milan. In research at the Computer Audio Research Lab at the University of California, San Diego, she developed techniques to convert radio waves from galaxies into sound, which are released by Island Records on her first CD, Music from the Galaxies. Fiorella, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Wonderful to talk to you.
The same, pleasure.
A graduate of Joe Green College there.
That's right.
Giuseppe Verdi.
Did you, speaking of acoustic astronomy, I want to ask you more about your process and how you developed what you did. But first of all, this is completely topical. The day we're recording this show, a news release came from NASA about the Chandra X-ray finding sound waves from black holes.
Yeah.
Well, doesn't that kind of confirm everything you've been talking about?
Well, absolutely. I've been doing that research in 1987, and if you go back at that time, I published that the main intonation of my galaxy was about around the B flat.
Okay.
And it was just amazing when I got this press release early this morning where they say is indeed a B flat.
And apparently the lowest one ever recorded.
Indeed, the lowest one. Here we are talking about a black hole.
Right.
Mine was a radio galaxy, but this is just amazing. I'm so happy that, this acoustic astronomy, the universe turning into sound is becoming a reality for everybody.
That's wonderful. So tell us a little bit about the process of acoustic astronomy. What's involved?
Basically, it uses a very simple and basic technology for astronomers and radio astronomers, but actually they are very complicated antenna called the radio telescope. The one I used is located in Socorro, New Mexico. It's the one also you can see in the movie Contact.
Oh, the very large array.
The very large array.
Okay.
27 dishes antenna in a Y configuration, very powerful. So you have to have a radio telescope, and then you have to have a powerful computer with a software, musical software. In this case, a sound synthesis language. So these are the main ingredients, because what you're going to do is to process radio waves coming from space into sound. This was done at University of California in San Diego at the computer audio computer audio. Hold on, I don't remember. Parentheses. Computer Audio Research Laboratory.
That's it, yeah.
Sorry, it was a long time ago. It was 1987.
And that was your PhD work, right?
That was a part of my dissertation, exactly.
Okay. And,
besides other goals and other research, I was working on a radio galaxy at that time. The name is UGC 6697.
Right.
And it's a very active and powerful object at 180 million light years away. And this galaxy was observed via the Very Large Array Radio Telescope, also via the Arecibo, the one in Puerto Rico. So my first experiment was to see how I can convert these radio waves into sound.
Is this, if we think of radio and visible light and gamma radiation and X-rays, they're all photons, but they're at different frequencies, and we can think of them as musical octaves.
Yes.
So in a sense, are you doing basically transposing?
Yes. Yes.
So that it's in a range that we can actually hear it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, what we receive from space are every kind of possible electromagnetic radiation. and this one can be in the radio waves domain, or it can be in the X-ray and gamma ray. Radio waves are very long wavelength, over a kilometer, and the frequency is very, very high, around gigahertz, billion of hertz. So you need to interpret this very, very high pitch, high frequency into audible, into what we hear usually, human hearing range between 20 hertz up to 20,000 hertz.
Since you already mentioned the movie Contact, which is a movie that I'm very fond of, there's a wonderful scene in there where two radio astronomers are basically talking about the fact that they both listen to radio signals. In fact, working in astrophysics and radio astronomy, how common is that for people to actually listen to the signals coming in versus, using visual representations and making little TV screen images?
It's very uncommon that astronomers listen to this kind of electromagnetic emission, because probably very few objects are really within the audible range. Let's say if you sit to the radio telescope and you plug your headset in the radio telescope directly, you might be able to hear some pulsars because they modulate within the human hearing range. But when you go to high energy phenomena such as radio galaxies or black holes, you need to have a piece of software in between, a sound synthesis language, a software that basically reduces, slow down this very high frequency into audible. So we do not listen very much. I think right now things are starting to change. Think about sound had this bad reputation in science, especially in astronomy. In 1987, when I did my acoustic astronomy research, no one was doing audionification or sonification of celestial data. Now, slowly, we are understanding that sound is very powerful, because it's immediate information about what's going on in a celestial object. So now sound slowly is getting more popular within astronomers. Also think about we have a more powerful computer and we have a more powerful software. So I do envision a great use of sound also in terms of radio astronomy, X-ray astronomy, gamma ray. Sound will be an alternative way to process celestial data.
It's interesting because there's a growing trend. I was reading an article last year about a man who is a cell biologist who, since the completion of the Human Genome Project, is using very similar sound synthesis software to actually listen to the genome. And he says that he can hear patterns in that, and it's very musical. Absolutely. And there are sound also in medicine, ultrasound. The duality always happen because we are always constantly watching, seeing things. So the duality is between hearing and seeing. And you have to compare these two senses we have. Seeing needs light. You need light to see an object. Hearing doesn't need light. You can be in the dark, you can be in daylight. It's always working. Also, you can't keep your eyes open forever. You need to close your eyes and sleep and relax and take a break. But our hearing device is on 24 hours a day. It doesn't stop. Even when you are sleeping, listening is on. So, and also, there is the fact that, seeing is only frontal. It covers, 270 degrees maybe, while listening is a 360 degrees. So we have to understand that, our hearing device is very, very powerful. It's immediate.
Well, let me ask you, Fiorella, this is Dan. I listened to your CD and I found it very interesting and kind of funky. But I wonder, too, because you had mentioned that, I guess, oral or sonic astronomy has sort of been, not in the mainstream. What things have you discovered in your career that, is there an overarching theory that, or something that you've found in listening to the universe that could bolster or supplement some major theory about physics or about the Big Bang or
cosmology?
Cosmology. Is it just sort of? I mean, is it because it reminded me, your CD, a little bit of like in the 1970s when you had whale songs. And is it something that is going to be dismissed, within a few years, or is there something that has been overlooked, that this is an entree into something bigger that can be incorporated into what is generally known from regular astrophysics?
In 1987, I did my first experiment using this radio galaxy. Of course, I really elaborated a lot on that experiment, and I came up with a proposal about acoustic astronomy, where I laid down very clearly some ideas, some hypotheses, some possibility how sound can be useful in astronomy. Unfortunately, I didn't get any grant because what I wanted to do was to catalog 100 galaxies, 100 binary star system, 100 black hole, so that you can start to have a comparison. So you can start to derive a very, very precise and detailed information, but I couldn't do that. However, if I can go a little bit in detail, just by listening and studying my audification of this galaxy at 180 million light years away, I found very interesting properties, such as the sound represents the dynamical. What's happening in this galaxy is having a collision with a nearby satellite companion object. So the sound gives you immediately dynamical information. It gives you chemical information. The frequency of hydrogen and helium, it's a very precise, recognizable sound. So you have a dynamical, chemical, and physical properties of the galaxy. So there are also other aspects which...
But is that different from, like, I know you can look at a star and determine what chemical properties are by its light signature. Is it more highly graded, or can sound provide, percentages, or that maybe, looking at the light fingerprint couldn't?
The sound is useful because it gives you right away immediately response, immediately information. So you can listen, you can get trained, and you can recognize right away what's happening in the galaxy. Collision, superheated jet, different chemical material. This is my theory, my hypothesis for what is concerning the radio galaxy I was working into. I'm not totally sure if sound will be this huge, gigantic discovery, but is indeed an alternative way to represent radio astronomical data, radio galaxy data. However, if we move on a different celestial object, such as a binary star system, remember, like Sirius A and Sirius B, two stars nearby each other. They emit frequency not identical, but close by. So they create beats. Beats are very well-known acoustic phenomena. When you tune a piano, you always create beats. So beats are very difficult to recognize in a visual representation of binary star system. But my theory is that hopefully audification of binary star system might bring to light more information about that. And then we have to move also to the Doppler effect. That is also something that we know well acoustically. But these, again, are all hypotheses. I like to believe that sound can be useful in astronomy. I don't see much progress, however, being done in general by scientists. Even the press release of today about the black hole and B flat and so on. It's very cute. It's very nice to read. But I would like to have a group of scientists that really explore if sound can be useful, and if so, what kind of information we can derive.
It seems to me that using sound, you're dealing, because sound happens over time, you're dealing with you're being able to hear changes, like the beat not just the beat frequencies, but even beyond that, you could. That's true. You should be able to determine a lot of things that are going on by pattern
Yeah.
and by wave, as well as by pitch, but maybe also by stereo imaging if you're able to, use parallax to get a little bit of a... In other words, light images are often very static.
Yes.
But sound seems to me to have the possibility of being able to watch something happen or, listen to change, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with you, and we should mention that too.
Okay.
Well, let me just change the subject a little bit for the next few minutes. Let's talk a little bit about your career. Now, people who are listening to this show, we'll have a link up to her your website, www.fiorella.com. But in reading your book, one of the things that I found is your description of the universal process are very highly with the sexual images, like bursting gamma rays, and there's clouds of stuff. And I mean, it reminded me a lot of when I was a junior high schooler and watching these films that we watch here in America of like sexual reproduction. Your writing style is very filled with images of creation and the kind of Mother Earth thing. And I'm wondering too, because in looking and researching on the web, a lot of people, there are snippets, they call you like the Madonna meets Carl Sagan or something like that. And on your book there, you're a real sexy babe on that cover. And I'm just wondering, to what degree has that been a positive or a negative, when you're dealing with these sort of gray old men, in smocks? Do they resent you? Do they belittle you? That certainly has had to have an impact on your career, for better or worse.
Well, when I was a student, I looked like a boy, I guarantee you, when I was doing my exam. I'm talking about Italy.
Yeah.
All right, so not the United States of America. So I really didn't want to stand out at all. I was a boy. I was going through my exam of chemistry, physical analysis, and so I always repressed my femininity a lot. I never wore a lipstick when I was studying, because again, in Italy, I didn't want to stand out. Easy, do my exam and leave. Then when I got my degree, finally I was certified, and finally I was able to explore a little bit my sensuality being a woman. And yes, indeed, I found it a little bit difficult at the very beginning. I was very much afraid because of criticism, because I didn't look like a scientist. So it was very difficult for me to be accepted by my look.
Okay.
And that is not a pleasant experience, to be judged by the way you look. Then I got much more comfortable in who I am, because I'm really who I am. I can't cut off a part of me. So I am just a woman, and I'm happy to be a woman. And now I'm very happy that I do not look like a scientist.
Well, earlier this year we had Dr. Lynn Margulis, a well-known scientist, also on the show. She's most known for being for the Gaia theory, along with Dr. James Lovelock. And I had asked her, and she said that she did not experience much in the way of sexism or being Jewish, anti-Semitism. Have you found sort of sexism more or less in the U.S. or in Europe, or basically really just a minor impediment, if at all?
A little bit, and in certain circumstances it was very, very extreme. You could tell right away that I was put down and isolated only because I didn't look like the stereotype. And this strong reaction again came from a very conservative group of scientists that want to keep the science and the teaching always the way it was in the past.
Very conservative,
Exactly. People that are unwilling to make any progress. And people that are also unwilling to recognize that, you can't keep on doing science the way we are doing today, because the students are being turned off. Young girls are not going to sign up to any physics classes if we don't make it more entertaining, more appealing.
Well, that's another thing. Is the fact that you have explored sort of this acoustic aspect of astronomy, is that part and parcel of a more feminine outlook towards science and the universe?
Yes. No, absolutely. I do agree with that. I think that the sound and the music background helped me a lot. I like to consider myself a scientist which is moved by an artistic sensibility. But I was very afraid of this one early on in my work, early on in my career.
Have you? Is that what led to when you were basically creating the CD-ROM that you released through Voyager called Invisible Universe? Mm-hmm. Was that the origin of that, wanting to blend science and art?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. I wanted to create something magnificent, beautiful, explosive, that was scientific, so you can learn about magnitude, distance, star type, and also you can be inspired by this fantastic animation, by poetry, by literature, by guided tour, so you can relax on your sofa, be comfortable, and just, go in the universe. I mean, we have to understand that the universe we live in is not a space just populated by objects.
I want to go into that a little bit more, because one of the things that I find most interesting in your work is that convergence of disciplines, pulling in from music composition and from astrophysics to create something new. I personally believe that science does not have to be ugly, plain, or boring. I mean, one of my favorite websites is the SOHO, the EIT website, which is the Solar Helioscopic Observatory, run by the European Union and JPL NASA, and they take extreme ultraviolet images of the sun several times a day, and those are some of the most beautiful pictures I've seen.
Yes, you're right. I saw the website. You're right.
I'm in love with that website.
Fabulous.
It's just, and they've also released a CD about Soho EIT, which is a similar multimedia teaching thing. So it seems to me that there's no reason for art not to be with science. I mean,
yes, exactly.
Has that? Do you see that being the wave of the future, perhaps?
100%.
Okay.
It's going to be a melt of science and art, music, knowledge, because that is the universe we live into. It's a universe that is filled with objects, you can measure them, but it's also a universe that is filled with emotional wonder. When you step out in the night sky and you look up to the night sky, to the universe, to Mars shining next to the full moon, this is a universe that is helping you to grow, to understand who you are. It's giving you certain kind of emotion. It's lifting you up. And then you go home and you might write a poetry, a music, you might start to write a book, or you can compute and you can start to analyze Mars and the light coming from the sky. But this is the universe. You can't fragment the universe by saying it's just a sterile place full of objects.
Okay.
It's a communing. It's a dialogue with the universe.
There's also another element of this that comes in, and basically where I'm coming from with that is I think there's a sacred element, or maybe a transpersonal element that comes in with that too. What I'm leading to is Dan mentioned whale songs before. When I first heard Music from the Galaxies, when I first sat down and listened to the CD, I was very strongly reminded of Tibetan Buddhist chant, which is a very low. It's a special technique they use in certain monasteries in Tibet, where they have this very, very low pitch, and then they sing overtones. But then there are these. It's just beautiful, beautiful stuff. But there's parallels between what you've discovered. It seems to me that maybe the same sounds are coming from different places now. Yeah.
I'm glad that we are pushing the acoustic envelope as much as we can, from the whale sound, now we have a space sound. And if you can analyze a little bit what's going on, you see that we are escaping all this tonal kind of music, because all the things you mentioned, the Tibetan, the monks, we are talking about a microtonality that is coming out.
Right.
And I'm happy about that. And if you listen also to the top 40 song, you see that shift. We are slowly filling up the gap and slowly escaping this tonal music that we are carrying out for centuries and centuries. But talking about monks and Tibetan music, I remember once I did an interview in Los Angeles on a radio station, and the DJ mixed my Galaxy, on Music from the Galaxy, with the Tibetan monks.
Okay.
And it was a perfect symphony.
Excellent.
Well, let's listen to some of your music as we head out of this segment. When we come back, we'll talk about some more aspects of the cosmos. Here's some.
And we're back, speaking with Dr. Fiorella Terenzi. We were just talking about the sacred, the art, and the science, everything pulling together. Before we get on to our next segment, where we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the more, quote, out there ideas in modern science these days, I wanted to read a short excerpt from a Navajo creation story that I found in a book by George Johnson called Fire in the Mind, Science, Faith, and the Search for Order. And it's a short story that goes like this. When all the stars were ready to be placed in the sky, First Woman said, I will use these to write the laws that we are to govern mankind for all time. These laws cannot be written on the water, as that is always changing its form, nor can they be written in the sand, as the wind would soon erase them. But if they are written in the stars, they can be read and remembered forever. That's from the Navajo creation myth.
Oh, that's very nice. Interesting you mentioned this quote, because I'm working on my next book, which draft approximately 77 principles how I see the universe working. and then I'm filtering those 77 principles down to maybe 10 or 11. But these are a law that applies above, and they are written forever in the universe. And if you pay attention, you will understand that these principles apply to everyday life and applies on our planet too.
That's interesting because that leads into chaos theory for me, which may seem like a strange association. I've been spending a lot of time lately reading about fractals, and one of the properties of fractals is that you can scale up and scale down, zoom in infinitely, zoom out infinitely, and the properties basically say the same on every level. It seems to me that you're talking about that too.
Yes, absolutely. It's like a universe that is folding on itself, like in the fractal. The deeper you go, the same structure you find, and it duplicates. That's why I like to learn about myself by looking up. How I see galaxy combining, interacting, colliding, merging, I see people doing the same. Different way, but more or less those principles, gravity, attraction, cluster, everything in the universe cluster together. For me, those principles apply in the big scale and apply to my every single day life.
Well, let me ask you, since Art quoted a creation myth, let's talk about the Big Bang and where that currently stands. Now, for most people, you know, raised at least in the West, you know, you had the Bible and Adam and Eve, and then the idea that the Earth was only like 4,000 some years old, and then, you know, a geologist, I think, was it James Hutton was one of the first geologists to explore deep time, Charles Lyell, and then when we started looking out in the galaxies, and about 100 or so years ago, it became obvious that the universe was a lot older, and there was the idea of the steady state universe, that things have always been and always will be. And then when it was 1963 or so, the AT&T or the Bell Labs, they discovered the background radiation, and the idea that the universe about anywhere from 12 to 20 billion years ago started in a great fireball. But it seems to me in the last 10 or 12 years in books that I've read with quantum physics and even something as basic as gravity, that most scientists are leaning towards the fact that the Big Bang, capital B, was really just a Big Bang, lowercase b, in some grander or larger multi or omniverse. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on the Big Bang? Is it really just another human way to grasp alpha myth because we can't deal with something that's always been, or what are your takes?
Well, it's very difficult to probe that subject, you know, because here we are going to be at the beginning of time, at the beginning of everything. Everything was just a tiny dot of infinite potential. So, but honestly, I like the theory of the Big Bang. I like to think about this concentration of all it exists now in this tiny little invisible dot, and then the expansion. And I have to tell you, I like the idea that the universe will reach a certain limit and then it will collapse back. I'm just using the word idea because I like to think the universe as a breathing.
But observationally, isn't the current idea that there's not enough matter to close the universe?
That's right, absolutely. And also, it seems that probably the universe was created simultaneously in different and several other places. So it's not coming from one sources only.
What do you mean by that? Did you mean that there were multiple bangs like in a fire? Oh, okay. So I know too, and you know, we don't want to get too technical, but I mean, I've always thought that one of the major flaws that I've always had just logically, and I can't argue, you know, with someone like you or a physicist, the technical aspects of physics, but I'm someone who's adept with words. When I read words, I can see some fallacies in arguments. You know, when people argue against, let's say, the existence of God or a creator, they say, well, if there's God, what was before God? And it's the same thing with the universe, is that, you know, if there was a Big Bang, there had to be something before. It's like adding 1 to infinity. There must have been something, and I've heard, you know, this space-time soup or something, and even if that existed, that was something, so that sort of obviates the beginning of time as we know it. Maybe in our little corner or room or bubble, soap bubble of a universe, our local time began, but there had to be some grander time and some grander thing. Just reasonably. I mean, am I just whistling past the graveyard there?
No, I'm listening. I can't compute the word God, so all the time I hear God, I am a little bit concerned of what's going on. But here we are talking about a cosmology that confine with almost a philosophy, talking about the Big Bang and the universe. I think that we need to explore the Big Bang starting from what we can observe today with the current technology. You see, the missing mass is a big problem, but I do believe it's going to be solved. The more we have a satellite, the more we have a bigger telescope and radio telescope. So you have to think about that our knowledge of the universe advance together with technology.
Okay.
And here's where our brain power comes to play. So I do believe that this universe is unfolding together with our technology, together with our science, together with our theorists and mathematicians. I'm not sure if I can really explain the universe and the Big Bang only talking about God or the religion. All the time I do, I find myself a little bit empty. But I look at the universe every single day, every single night. I teach, I talk, and I elaborate on this universe. And I see pattern of creation. And think about a star is created and then it explodes. From the dust, another star is going to be created. So I wonder why this creation process, this breathing, this rhythm cannot be applied to the universe. And that is why, before I said, I like the Big Bang theory. But these are all hypotheses.
That's a matter of scale again, then, isn't it?
It is a matter of scale.
Birth and death of stars, birth and death of galaxies, birth and death of the universe.
And we have not to forget that in this cycle, we are a part too.
Right.
We have been created, our atoms in our body have been created over and over and over in the universe. And I was reading a paper that calculated how many parts, how many stars you have been part of. You know the answer?
What?
No?
No.
The current estimate is between 1,000 to 1,000,000 stars.
Wow.
Means you, our planet, all your listeners, our sun was created over and over and over. This is just amazing. So I understand this little detail, and I would like to apply to the big microcosmos.
Sure.
And I think it might be more or less the same.
Well, let me ask you this. I should have brought Discover Magazine, the latest issue. I didn't bring it. I don't know if you subscribe to it or you know, are familiar with it. But they had an article, and I forget the name of the scientist. It was basically talking about gravitation and how they're trying to tweak gravitation from not just the Newtonian but the Einsteinian gravitation, because they've discovered that when Pioneer spacecrafts have left the sun, that instead of predictably the sun's gravity getting weaker, it's not getting weaker at certain small levels. It's getting a little bit stronger. And I've also read things about gravity being probably the most weird of all the four main forces, because and some people have speculated that gravity, if there are things as multiple universes, that gravity does work, is the only of the four forces that might work for them. And I don't know the mathematical equations, but I'm just wondering, is a basic force like gravity, are there problems with classical ideas about it?
Gravity is still a little bit unknown, you know, the duality. We do not know yet if it's a wave field or not.
Right, okay.
There are different publications. Actually, I was reading that so far it seems that it really is indeed a wave.
Yeah, gravitons they call them.
Exactly. But gravity, it does apply on the bigger scale in the universe. It applies to our solar system, planets and the sun. It applies to the local group, the galaxy, the group of galaxies we live into, and it applies to supercluster. And it applies also to people. Don't people cluster together? So I do see gravity, yes, working on a bigger scale.
Well, here's another thing that I found interesting, and I think I read it. It wasn't in another magazine. It seems that everything in the universe rotates. Now, it seems to me if there were a big bang, things would shoot out from a central point. But it seems that not only do stars and heavenly bodies rotate, and they revolve around each other, galaxies rotate, superclusters rotate, and the universe as a whole rotates. And I'm just wondering, what is the current explanation for this spin?
That's another very good question. I wish I could have a very good, intelligent answer to give you.
It's just one of those things we have to accept, I guess, at this point.
I guess at this point, barely we can understand, the spin of our planet. But everything definitely is in rotation. Gravity is a gravitational force. Could be also involved in that process.
It seems, I was playing with the Mandelbrot set, back to fractals a little bit, and there's one part of the set that is basically this infinite series of spirals. And it seems to me that we see spirals everywhere in the universe, too, on all levels of scale. And maybe that ties into the rotational energy thing.
Well, we have also hurricane on our planet that form a spiral, and they rotate depending on which hemisphere you are, of course. This is a law. This is a principle of the universe. This is the way it works. A certain principle of this universe that cannot be escaped.
When you talk about fractals too, that brings to my mind what's known as the butterfly effect. Basically, that a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, and a tornado occurs in China, something along those lines. To what degree is interconnectedness? This also goes back to maybe the feminine approach to science. To what degree is connectedness sort of dismissed in modern science, and what remedy is there for it? Because their holistic approaches are generally dismissed as some kind of bunkum or some kind of voodoo or a Zen kind of approach that has quasi-religious overtones. Does it actually have a more hard approach that can be brought into science?
I'm not sure about that yet. The butterfly effect having effect. Actually, there were a couple of experiments that, seems to confirm that kind of butterfly effect. Personally, I like to think about the interrelation of everything on our planet and in the universe. And I like to think about the universe as a place that knows exactly what's going on in every solar system, in every galaxy. And this is a little bit a bigger effect, not so much a butterfly effect. So it's a universe that is aware of every single action. It's a universe that knows how to chart an electron, a proton, that knows the inner mechanism of matter and how these particles are related to each other. Even if they are spread out over billions of light years away, they are still interrelated. So if one particle changes spin or goes upside down, the other one respond. That's as far as I can go and as far as I can comment. These are all fabulous ideas. I could spend a night talking about this one.
Well, let me just as we end this segment, and on our next segment, we're going to bring on Jeffrey Mishlove. I just wanted to ask, what do you think are the chances of, say, within our lifetime, us finding another Earth-like planet? We've found now over 100 extrasolar planets. Do you think within, the next 30, 40 years, we're going to find an Earth-like world? And I personally think the minute we do, I'd say we start counting the decades that we'll have faster than light travel, because I think you'll see volumes of money poured into developing research like never before, because we'll have another world to exploit. Do you think that's reasonable in, say, 30 or 40 years that we'll find another Earth within, say, 10 million, 10 light years or so?
It is indeed reasonable if we develop more technology, more computing power. Absolutely. I believe in technology. However, there is something I wanted to comment upon that. Hold on, I forgot it. Hold on, wait. What did you say before? What did you...
I was talking about finding another Earth-like world.
Or, you said something very interesting, the fact that finding another planet that is similar to Earth could inspire us to move forward.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, I want to launch a little small message, is that we can start to explore our solar system, even to go to the moon, even to go and mine some uranium or plutonium or some gold, or why not some diamond on some asteroid or some moon. So I believe in making space profitable.
Yeah.
I want to see space become a commercial. I want to see the International Space Station making a profit, showing people that we can make money. That I believe will push our exploration of space much faster, and we will grow much better and quicker. So it seems a contradiction, but I do believe that we need to start to colonize this solar system.
Well, let's leave it right there, and when we pick up, we're gonna listen to some more of your music, and then we're gonna bring on Jeffrey Mishlove and talk about some of these things and some other things not so often talked about in science. So let's listen to some more. Well, we're back here in our third segment of this Omniversica show. We've been talking with Dr. Fiorella Terenzi, an astronomer most noted for acoustic astronomy. And in this third segment, we're joined by Jeffrey Mishlove. And people who are listening to this show in America probably know him best from a PBS show called Thinking Aloud, which I don't think is being recorded anymore, but it ran for about a decade or so in the 1990s, and I know I watch it regularly here in the Twin Cities on Channel 17 Tuesdays at 7:30, and I was really disappointed when it went off the air, because I thought that Jeffrey was one of the best interviewers that I'd heard, up there with someone like a Tom Cottle, who also is a psychologist, as is Jeffrey, and Phil Donahue and Charlie Rose. And basically the show explored science and also some fringe elements, things like UFO, extrasensory perception, but also I do remember, I think you did a 3-part show with Steven Pinker, a guy we hope to get on this show next month. But welcome to Jeffrey Mishlove.
Thank you.
What we'd like to talk about a little bit, we were talking with Dr. Terenzi about astronomy and stuff, but to what we were talking about physics and the sort of the Big Bang and whatnot. And I guess to bring it in, I just wanted to talk a little bit, I guess, about Jeffrey and your career. Now, you had founded an institute called the Institute of Noetic Sciences.
Oh, no, I certainly did not found
you didn't found it?
No, that was founded by the astronaut Edgar Mitchell.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
Right.
But that is an institute that does explore various aspects of science and a lot of things that are generally overlooked in general science, correct?
It does, and I've had an affiliation with them for many years.
My era.
in different capacities. I'm the president of an organization called the Intuition Network, and for several years I had my offices right inside the building of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and we work very closely together.
And people can also look up thinkingaloud.com and also mishlove.com. Those are two of your websites that have your various projects. And I'm holding in my hand, in fact, a book, Thinking Aloud, Leading Thinkers of Our Time in Conversation with Jeffrey Mishlove, Ph.D. And that's got, I don't know, several dozen of your, I guess, best interviews from the show. Let me just talk about interviewing. As I said, I thought you had a very good interviewing style, and you interviewed a lot of individuals across the spectrum, people who are highly respected in the field, like a Steven Pinker, and also people that, you know, are a bit more quasi on the edge of respectability. And I'm just wondering, did you approach your interviews basically the same, or when you're dealing with someone like maybe a UFO contactee, is it hard to give them the same kind of credence that you would someone like a Steven Pinker?
Well, I think my basic philosophy, Dan, has been to treat every guest with respect. And as an interviewer, I always saw my role as trying to draw them out so that they could present their ideas in the most articulate way possible. And I believe that is a philosophy of life. I think all human beings deserve respect just for having been born on this planet. And it would be a better world if people would just respect each other more.
What was probably the topics that interested you the most? Was it astronomy? Was it psychology? Was it the more unexplained phenomena?
Well, you know, I have a doctoral degree in parapsychology. It happens to be the only doctoral diploma in parapsychology ever awarded from an accredited American university, and that's really been my passion: ESP research, psychokinesis. And from there, of course, you branch out into other areas of the paranormal, everything from UFOs to astrology. But I really do have a passion for ESP research. Since we're here with an astronomer, I should add, of course, that I think that there's some fascinating relationships between the study of cosmology and the study of extrasensory perception. Ultimately, they get down to basic principles about time and space and consciousness.
Well, I mean, so when we're talking about like extrasensory perception, most people equate that with precognition or telekinesis. what basis is there, do you think, in, say, classical physics as, as known by current science that supports this, if you took a hard approach to it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose you could start with the leading edge work today in theoretical physics seems to be superstring theory.
Okay.
There are thousands of physicists working in this area now, and superstring theory is based on the idea that the universe is not simply 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time, as we think conventionally, and as we experience through our normal senses. In superstring theory, there are multiple dimensions of space. It's called hyperspace. And once you begin to look at the possibility of hyperspace, then the phenomenon of extrasensory perception and precognition and psychokinesis no longer seem quite so strange.
Now that's different from string theory, which is the theory that the basic bits of matter are little strings rather than infinite points, correct? That's
no, superstring theory is really another word for string theory. They're both pretty much synonymous with each other, and the idea of these strings, you see, is that they're not simply strings that only exist in the 3 dimensions of space that we know. These strings vibrate in multiple dimensions.
And so
I'm sure my guest, probably your other guest, would know more about it than I do. But it's an area that I'm very passionate about. And speaking of astronomy, there's just been a big article published in Astronomy magazine this month that addresses the question, because it has to do with time and the quantization of time. And some astronomers have discovered that time does not seem to be quantized, which seems to be some of the first empirical evidence for in support of string theory and the idea of hyperspace.
Fiorella, are you familiar with that?
I'm not that familiar, but my question is that how parapsychology, ESP, could give us information about the time being quantized. I mean, there are some technique. Could you please, Dr. Jeffrey, elaborate on that? How do you derive information about time? Are we talking about meditation? Can you please?
Yes, of course. In parapsychology, the experiments that are most directly related to the nature of time itself are what we call studies in precognition, where I might ask you to describe today an event that will take place in the future in which nobody could conceivably know about today, because it will be determined at a future time based on some sort of a random process. And, well, for example, I might ask you questions about what the stock market will do, but not in a way that could be conventionally predicted. I might say, what will be the last digit of the Dow Jones Industrial Average 3 days from now? And other questions, and we find people are able to do this sort of thing in a manner that is statistically significant.
But I know that Art actually worked for Llewellyn Publishing, which publishes Fate magazine for a while, and I know they've done remote viewing experiments. I think last year they tried to find the location of Osama bin Laden. I mean, and as far as I know, without any success. Is that also in that same vein?
Well, you can do remote viewing precognitively as well. Now, the critics of parapsychology say, well, here's an example it didn't work. They haven't found Osama bin Laden. I think you have to view parapsychology research as probabilistic, which is how all science or much of science is. It's statistical. It would be like Babe Ruth, who was the greatest home run hitter for many decades. He was also had more strikeouts than any other baseball player. So parapsychology works that way.
Well,
previously, Dr. Jeffrey, we were discussing the number of stars we have been part of in our creation process. You know, how many times our sun turned, exploded, and reformed again. And the current estimate I mentioned on the show is about between 1,000 and 1,000,000 stars. My question is, do we maintain, according to your science of parapsychology, do we maintain a memory of these 1,000,000 stars we have been part of?
That's an interesting question. And as I understand astronomy, our bodies are actually made up of atoms that were thrown out from these supernova explosions.
Exactly.
Right.
And the calculation of those supernova explosions, let's say, is closer to 1,000,000 explosions.
Yeah.
So our atoms have been created, forged, recreated over and over 1,000,000 times. Does parapsychology help? Do we keep a memory? Does parapsychology answer this question, or am I going a little bit too far out?
Well, let me say this. If I were to speak to you strictly as an experimental parapsychologist, sticking to the data, I'd have to say we haven't looked at that question. But speaking as a theoretical parapsychologist with an interest in metaphysics, it seems that we don't know, although nobody is perfect and people are not able to do retrocognition or precognition perfectly, neither do we know any limit whatsoever to the ability of the human mind to see information across space or across time. So I would say that there's every reason to think that people can find within themselves memories of distant events across the universe.
Well, let me because I'm someone who has had an interest in what we call psi or Fortean phenomena for a number of years, and it sounds too that dovetails somewhat with some people's claims about ghosts being, or instead of being, the after. The consciousness of dead people, that ghosts or ghost-like phenomena are really the imprinted vibrations of like traumatic events or individuals that have been imprinted in a certain area or rocks. And going back to the idea about is there some kind of, I guess, primal memory or primal essence in all of these explosions and recapitulations and recreations of matter? I'm just wondering, if we talk about like ghosts and people's claims about seeing ghosts, is that maybe a scientific into studying that phenomena?
Well, when it comes to ghosts, I think there are many possible interpretations. But what you're talking about might be more akin to what in parapsychology we call psychometry.
Right.
There are psychics, for example, you can give them an object, like from an archaeological exhibit, and they're able to describe how the object was used.
Right.
And they can come up with data which archaeologists even find useful. It's as if memory impressions are somehow left on the objects themselves that good psychics can pick up on.
Talking about the memory, I have a question. Okay?
Shoot.
Does water maintain a memory? Where water has been on the mountains, the basic concept of homeopathy. Does water remember where it's been?
It's an excellent question.
Can you comment on that? These are intriguing questions that maybe can help, open up a new possibility.
Yeah, I'm not much of an expert in that area. The field of homeopathy research has looked at that, and there have been some studies published in the scientific magazines suggesting that their water does have a memory, even at a level below what they call Avogadro's number. It doesn't have to do with any molecules that are in the water. We do studies in psychic healing where you'll have a healer who charges the water through healing energy, and then a sick person will drink that water, and it seems to have an effect, even in double-blind studies where they don't know which of several different vials of water have been charged by a healer. So
let me just ask though, when we're talking about memory is a complicated process. It's a cognitive process. When we're talking about the memory, aren't we sort of anthropomorphizing, because aren't we talking then that there might be some kind of really at a molecular level, some kind of signature that then can be interpreted by conscious minds? And when we talk about the memory of water, or the idea that everything has a kind of living essence or whatnot, aren't we really talking about that's how we conscious beings are interpreting that a rock isn't a living thing with a memory per se. He can't say, well, last Tuesday, that kid who threw me through the window. But when we talk about memory that a rock might have, it's maybe some kind of imprinting, or it's some energy that's stored up of a particular kind of event. Correct?
Right.
Well, in the healing studies that I'm referring to, they've done spectrographic analysis of the water, and they find that what I'm referring to of memory, of having been charged, has to do with some of the molecular bonding in the water molecules themselves. The angles between the various atoms in the molecule shift slightly, and so you could. What I meant by it is that the molecule seems to be carrying some information in it.
Exactly.
It's moved to a different quantum state, perhaps? Or?
Yeah, it might be something along those lines.
Or something in the electron shells.
Well, let me just, since we have an astronomer here, and right before we brought Jeffrey on, we were talking about the search for Earth-like worlds and extrasolar planets, and I know that I do remember several of your shows, Jeffrey, dealing with the alien abductions, and I personally have always been kind of skeptical of alien abductions because the classic Whitley Strieber, gray, bug-eyed aliens is almost a typically American kind of phenomenon, whereas when I read about alien encounters in South America or South Africa or China, there's a whole array of aliens. I'm just wondering, to what degree does popular culture shape this phenomena? If we go back to fairy lore and, abductions, how much of that is real and how much of that is pop culture's influence on what might be, internally generated phenomena? Jeffrey?
Well, it seems to me that it's a combination. I'll give you a parallel. Deathbed visions have been recorded in all cultures, and many people, when they die, they have visions, and they describe to the people around them of spiritual beings coming to welcome them into the afterlife. Well, in Christian cultures, they describe it, the language they use, this is Jesus coming. In Hindu cultures, this may be Krishna. In a Buddhist culture, it may be the Buddha coming to welcome them. So you get sort of a cultural overlay on inner experiences that may be the same experience.
Yeah, but don't psychotropic drugs also affect the mind in very similar ways to near-death experiences? I mean, could it not be that it's an internally generated phenomenon that is interpreted? I mean, when people have, for example, I know when I've read supposed reincarnation stories, people say, well, I lived my whole life in Iowa, but when I was a kid, I remember that red house in Cincinnati, Ohio, although I've never been there. And a lot of times when I've read from what would be called debunkers or skeptics, a lot of the stuff could really be attributed to, just things that have been picked up. To what degree then, is something like reincarnation, plausible? Is it not just wish fulfillment, perhaps?
Well, the skeptics would like to say that it's all wish fulfillment or error. A parapsychology researcher has as their responsibility to rule out those possibilities, to find cases that are so good that the skeptical hypotheses don't stand up. It's very similar to the work that was done in the 19th century when Madame Curie and her husband discovered radium. They started out with a ton of pitchblende, which was an ore, and by the time they'd finished with it, they came up with 1 gram or a couple of grams of pure radium. So doing good research on a topic like reincarnation is very similar to that. You have many, many cases you have to wade through and experiments that are potentially confounded. And the skeptics would like to tell you there never will be any pure radium. It's all just pitch blende. But parapsychologists differ.
But let me just ask you, because we were talking with Fiorella about the feminine holistic approach to science that she seems to embody. Mm-hmm. Is there any kind of empiric way to, test something like reincarnation, or is it just basically that faith? And, if faith it can't be tested empirically, is this outside the realm of science? I'm thinking like Stephen Jay Gould had his 2 magisteria of religion and science. Mm-hmm. And is that something beyond the pale of science? And
no, I don't think so. There have been thousands of case studies in reincarnation that have been accumulated in laboratories and in studies. For example, Dr. Ian Stevenson, who's now retired from the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Virginia, has published many articles on reincarnation cases in scientific journals in the field of psychiatry. Typically what he looks for are cases of young children who at an early age, just about as soon as they can begin to speak, before they've had any opportunity to be contaminated by cultural overlay, they begin describing a past life that they remember and who their parents were. And in the best of these cases, researchers are called in and they get to write down all of the statements made by the children. Perhaps it's about a neighboring village before the children have ever had a chance to visit that village.
But haven't there been hundreds or thousands of people who claim to be Napoleon or Julius Caesar, and or in that arena, rather than just being Grog the cave nerd? What I'm saying?
No, as a matter of fact, that's not true. I mean, no? where would you get that idea? Hundreds of thousands of people claiming to be Napoleon.
Oh. Well, it's a popular trope.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a myth being spread by skeptics. There's nothing to it.
Okay.
There's been studies, for example, by Helen Wambach, a researcher, looking at past life regression therapy when people are hypnotized to remember past lives. And she got the studies from hundreds of past life therapists and thousands of cases of people describing who they were in past lives. And she found that the demographic distribution in terms of social status was very much in akin with historical records. It wasn't as if everybody was claiming to be Napoleon or Jesus Christ
or Cleopatra.
Queen Mary.
Yeah, one of the dovetails of that. This is a slightly humorous idea, but it occurs to me then, just statistically, then that everybody must have had at least one Chinese lifetime. Or just based on statistics, because they're so...
I think I've had a Chinese lifetime.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if that's verified or not.
But, that Art, that brings up a good idea, though, because, we're all agreed that, we evolved from lower animals. So if there is such a thing as an afterlife or a spiritual life, at what point did human beings break in and get a soul? This goes to the idea of abortion, too, and fetuses. When is ensoulment? And at what point, if we go back and let's say we had 100 or 100,000 previous lives or something, at some point we weren't human. So there had to have been, I think, a first human soul, if you will.
Well, my reference to answer your question would be one of my mentors, Arthur Young,
mm-hmm.
who was a cosmologist who wrote a wonderful book called The Reflexive Universe. And he believes that the soul also evolves. And in his theory, which I think is very elegant and as defensible as any other I know, consciousness begins at the level of what you could call the quantum of action, the smallest, the first photon, you could say, in the beginning already had a certain degree of consciousness associated with it.
It occurs to me, and we were talking with Dr. Fiorella a little while ago about fractals, in the sense that if you look into certain aspects of chaos theory, and specifically fractals, there are these images that you can basically zoom in and out of infinitely, and yet processes seem to repeat themselves on any different scale.
Yeah.
We see spirals in the whirlpools in water, we see them in hurricanes, we see them in the galaxies. spirals and circles seem to be everywhere, for example, on every single scale of the universe, from the tiniest quantum level all the way up to, the super galaxies. It occurs to me that maybe, getting back to the superstring idea, some of that is built into the structure, and some of what you're talking about in terms of working, extrasensory phenomenon might be linked into that, just in terms of patterns. Does that connect at all?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, let's get into a bit more about astronomy and things dealing with like life on other worlds and stuff, and bring Fiorella a bit back into the conversation in our next segment. And let's end this. Okay, we're back with Jeffrey Mishlove and Dr. Fiorella Terenzi. And Fiorella, you were just ready to ask Jeffrey a question.
Yes, I'm interested to know if the universe is a conscious place.
The universe.
Can we know what's going on?
You mean the universe itself? Like
the universe itself,
like
exactly.
Built into the structure of the universe, there's an intelligence or consciousness?
An intelligence, a conscience that is aware, knows what's going on, can compute the billions of galaxies, and know exactly what's going on in each galaxy.
Well, I would tend to say yes if I had to bet.
Well, you know, I had brought up earlier in an earlier segment before we brought you on, Jeffrey, I'm sure you're familiar with Frank Tipler and the Omega Point hypothesis. I'm wondering, you know, the idea that the universe is in itself a sort of a computer, and how does that fit into maybe spirituality and the whole holistic approach to everything, sort of?
Oh, all right. Well, let me try and come back to the original statement, though. Is the universe conscious?
Okay.
If I may. You get that idea from many different sources. First of all, it's the basis of religion, in which religions, you know, say before creation there was God, which is a universal consciousness. You get it in philosophy, a whole branch of philosophy called idealism. Very logical, worked out by, amongst other people, Bishop Berkeley, for whom the city of Berkeley, California was named, who showed in rigorous logical terms that everything exists inside the mind of God. You find it in Vedantic philosophy and in Buddhist philosophy, but interestingly enough, the argument can also be made from quantum physics, based on what's called the collapse of the wave function.
Yeah, that's like Schrodinger's cat, right?
Yes, exactly. And physicists going back to the 1930s with John von Neumann argued that what causes the wave function to collapse is consciousness itself.
Yeah.
So
from there, another Nobel laureate physicist, Eugene Wigner, argued, well, what consciousness is it? Is it the consciousness of the observer, or is it the consciousness of somebody observing the observer? And ultimately, he said it's a kind of super consciousness. And you see, this is very significant because conventional physics doesn't include consciousness. It only has matter, energy, time, and space.
Right.
So, but the implication of this argument from quantum physics is that consciousness itself is primary, just as primary or more primary than matter, energy, time, and space.
And that goes to the idea of the anthropic principle. And now, so you're arguing then, if the universe has some kind of consciousness that pre-existed before, let's assume humans are the first, you know, sentient civilization, which we can't prove, but that there was a pre-existing consciousness, that almost begs, I think we would call what the hard or the strong anthropic principle, correct?
Yeah.
I'm intrigued about. Oh, I'm sorry, just lost my train of thought.
Well, I wanted to also, in this segment, talk with Dr. Fiorella, too, because back a few years ago in the mid-'90s, some microbes, or some alleged microbes, were found on some small meteorites that had landed in Antarctica. And we know that they were from Mars because the rocks were exposed and they would have had to have come and whatnot. I'm just wondering, what is the state, Dr. Terenzi, of the possibility of life on Mars, or life, I think it's on Europa, one of the major moons of Jupiter?
You know, I'm sorry to say, not much progress.
No?
No, not much progress on that. Still a lot of question mark, but remember that that is the reason why we should go to Mars, because maybe there is life.
If you're a betting woman, do you think that there probably was at some point, but maybe not now?
Yeah, absolutely. I wish we could prove that there is life, or there were life in Mars, so we should go to Mars. It's a human exploration I'm talking about. We have the capability, we should land on Mars.
Well, let me ask you this. There was a film in the late 80s, in the TV show Star Trek had a film where they went back in time and to repopulate the whale population that had gone extinct. And I've heard people speculate that there might be in Europa an under ice sea. And I'm just wondering, suppose we took and listened with one of our radio telescopes and focus it, let's say, on Europa. I'm wondering, could you tell if there were maybe life by listening to the sloshes or whatnot underneath this giant slush ball?
The SETI project, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, does indeed search for and listen to, quoted listen for certain kind of pattern. I'm not sure if you're talking about like an acoustic wave, the sound of the ocean on Europa. No, you will not be able to listen that. Unless you have a gigantic microphone over there and under the soil.
Right.
But what you could do is what we are doing today, monitor the entire sky as much as we can, day and night, and see if we can come up with a constant pattern that we can recognize as coming from an intelligent source.
One of the things that occurs to me, talking about both that search for extraterrestrial life and the possibility that we live in a conscious universe, the whole idea about the fact that it takes a conscious intelligence to interact in order to say, hey, I'm here, or hey, this is a byproduct. I mean, if you think about it, in some ways it comes back to the movie Contact, which I find very intriguing, because there's a section of that movie where they start receiving a verifiably intelligent signal coming from the Vega star system, and the signal turns out to be a TV signal, and it's the first signal that we broadcast. It was basically the Berlin Olympic Games. It was the first international television broadcast, but we're constantly sending out a radio stream. And in some ways, we're reaching out to touch someone, to use the old telephone cliche. Well, SETI, I know, is going on the assumption that somebody else is sending out signals and we'll eventually hear them. But it occurs to me that from the parapsychology viewpoint, every time you interact with the universe, you're creating a conscious intelligence feedback loop at the same time, perhaps. Does that make sense to either of you?
Yeah, I think the SETI project is based on finding intelligent life like us.
Right.
Elsewhere in the universe, but intelligent life could be very different from us. And intelligent life might be as much akin to us as we are, let's say, to snails.
So we might not recognize the pattern or the signal created by that intelligence.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I forget who it was in the mid-20th century said that the difference between advanced technology and magic is just the way we view it. I mean, if there were some intelligence that were even just several thousand years beyond us, I mean, they probably would have faster than light travel. They'd probably have almost instant healing capabilities. They would appear almost godlike, getting back to like an Eric von Daniken type approach, ancient astronauts and all. But
well, that leads me to the idea of myth, because one of the things that some of the realms that we've been talking about, both with Dr. Terenzi's work and with Dr. Mishlove's work, some people in the mainstream of science would call this fringe work. I don't like the word fringe because I think that contains a negative judgment. I prefer cutting edge or bleeding edge as a term, but it seems to me we're talking about a shift in the very paradigm about how we think about doing science, how we think about the universe. In some ways, are we not just creating a new creation story with what we're doing with this?
I think myth is a very important function of human beings, and it's important to keep evolving the myths that we have. The myths are the largest stories about who we are and why we're here and where we came from. And they should continue to evolve. And in some ways, myths serve to pull us into our future. Mm-hmm.
Well, I've always thought that the 20th century basically has given rise to maybe only one field of belief that could be considered another religion, and that I think would be the UFO ufology, whether it was the 1950s era contactees or whether it was the later abductees with the Betty Hill and Barney Hill and on through the 1980s and whatnot. If we get back to just science again, what if we were to assume that there were intelligent beings out there that was at least similar enough to us that they would be about our size, that they would travel in spaceships and flit around the galaxy or galaxies, what kind of I mean, is I know a lot of scientists say, you know, faster than light travel is a pipe dream. Is that, and I'll ask Jeffrey from a more a mythological perspective and Fiorella from a physics perspective, is faster than light travel possible? Assuming even, let's say, there were creatures out there in the universe similar enough to us intellectually, could we ever converse with them? Could we ever have Congress?
My sense is that we have to begin to take seriously the findings of string theory about hyperspatial dimensions. And it may well be that all of the religious myths talking about contact with beings who had extraordinary powers and traveled in celestial chariots and so on are referring to a phenomenon that's still going on today and is related to the UFO phenomenon. And it may indeed have to do with contact with intelligent beings who are so different from us because they don't operate in 3 dimensions the way we do. They're operating hyperspatially.
So you're saying that they wouldn't need necessarily faster than light travel. They could sort of sort of like seep through the pores, interdimensional pores in the universe or something like that.
You could say that, something like that. The whole notion of faster than light is the notion of the speed of light itself is a notion that is, well, let me put it this way. I think it's a problematic notion. It's a notion based on only a certain perspective. Einstein pointed out in his theory of relativity that, for example, when you're traveling at the speed of light, if you were riding on a photon, your clock would stop. So from the point of view of light itself, it's everywhere at once.
Yeah. And that's like I've also read that supposedly in the early stages of the Big Bang that light was actually faster than what is 186,000 miles per hour, and that accounts for who was Guth, Alan Guth, who had the idea of inflation that in that first millisecond or whatever that light and all matter that it jumped, that there was a brief time when light was faster than it is. And the idea too of quantum states that all of known physics at some point, you know, in a snap is like a pop of a bubble, and we could be at a lower quantum state and physics as we know it could change. Now I'm just wondering, just to get back to more of the astronomy.
I would like to add one comment about UFO and extraterrestrial being and message from space. Because there is a common sense that all the time we have to think about. If you receive a signal from space, from an intelligent civilization, we have to be very careful in answering that message.
Yeah, we don't know whether they like it's the old, there's a Twilight Zone, a television show, you know, to serve man. They might be here to help us. They might be here to make cattle of us.
Exactly. So we have to be a little bit more careful on that.
Okay.
But now, you know, we had talked earlier about possibly humans finding Earth-like worlds. I'm just wondering if the reverse might be true. I mean, is humanity evolved enough that if we go out there, I mean, do we really want, you know, global corporations? You had talked about the commercialization of space, Fiorella, being a good thing. I know that to a certain, I agree to a certain extent, but I don't necessarily know if we need rapacious corporate, you know, CEO mentalities going to, you know, we're going to tear apart the asteroid belt bit by bit so that we can have pools on the moon of Jupiter.
But probably that is going to be only the future for human exploration in space. Think about, there are no other resources. Think think about a shuttle. How much does it cost to build a space shuttle?
Mm-hmm.
And then here we are talking about a shuttle that is already a very old computer.
Well, I mean, you don't think that there's hope that different nations like the ESA and NASA?
I don't believe that there is the cash and the capital.
Okay.
I believe it's going to be corporation, indeed, but I don't see that as an evil act.
Yeah.
I see that as an incentive for human exploration of space and colonization.
Yeah, and I would hope that there would be regulations, government regulations, whether it's by a world body or by individual governments, that would put reins on things, because look at how many species go extinct. I mean, I read somewhere that something like an average of 6 species a day that they estimate go extinct in the last 20 years. I mean, if we had a whole new world that human beings landed on, putting aside the fact that we might bring our own diseases and wipe things out unintentionally, our human colonization of new lands, whether it was Australia or North America or Native Americans came over, is not particularly good. I mean, I would, if I were a native on another land and I was sentient and I saw these humans coming, I'd be pretty worried. But let's end this segment and listen to another piece of music from Fiorella Terenzi, and in our final segment we'll just throw out a miscellany of items to talk to both Drs. Terenzi and Mishlove.
And we're back talking with Dr. Fiorella Terenzi and Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove.
Well, we were just talking with both of them on the break about some of their ideas and things that they like to do. And I'd like to just start off this final segment talking to Dr. Fiorella Terenzi about the dissemination of knowledge. You seem to have a keen interest in putting knowledge out to the younger generation and getting people excited about learning, which, especially here in the U.S., I don't know how bad it is in Europe, seems to be, pleasure seems to dominate the quest for knowledge. And what things would you change in the educational system to get more people involved in science?
I will meld science with art and knowledge with emotion. Actually, it seems to be a contradiction, but I like to use emotion when teaching science, physics, or astronomy. Basically, what I aim to is an emotional learning, because it's like when we are a child, once you grab that concept via your emotion, you remember that concept forever. And I want to do that with a very difficult concept, from a differential equation to X-ray black hole. It's important that you link those scientific concepts in teaching with emotion.
So you're talking about passion in some ways.
Somehow it's a passion, but I'm talking about emotion, which are a very powerful way for us to remember.
Okay.
Our brain computes emotion in a very special way. Think about the first song you learn when you were a child. You remember the song for the rest of your life. And that's what I would like to see to happen in the future. A science that is becoming exciting, enlightening, empowering, and entertaining.
And an oral approach to the universe would seem to be that, because people could probably remember a few bars from a piece of your music more easily than they could say, well, oh, that's a photo of Cygnus 671 or whatever.
Yes, absolutely. And when I teach the moon, I start always with Pink Floyd, The Dark Side of the Moon.
Oh, cool.
Everybody, attention is activated and say, yes, I want to know about that.
Cool.
Well, that segues us over to Jeffrey Mishlove, because he had expressed an interest in Fiorella's work, and you said that you are also branching out into art. Is it visual arts, music, or what, Jeffrey?
Well, actually, both music and visual art, but it's a very new thing for me. On a project to, one might say, fall awake to higher dimensions of my own being. And so I've been composing music and creating art, and I actually have an art exhibit that's going to take place in Los Angeles at the Philosophical Research Society during the month of October and probably into November. What I'm creating is a kind of art, I call it the rainbow yin-yang. It's a symbol, an icon, and people can see it by going to the Intuition Network website, which is www.intuition.org. One example is there. It's the logo of the Intuition Network, but now I'll fill a room with large paintings of them. And people ask me, what is it? I say, if I had to take everything that I've learned in doing thousands of interviews and getting a PhD in parapsychology and spending decades exploring metaphysics and psychic research, and if I could communicate all of that in one graphic image, this would be it.
Well, let me just ask you then, Jeffrey, and I'll then ask the same question of Fiorella. How did you get interested in your main passion, parapsychology? Did you have some kind of vision or some experience, near-death experience as a child yourself, or experience with, fairies, or did you see a lake monster, or, what got you into that?
I had a very normal childhood. I grew up in a middle-class family in a small town in Wisconsin without ever considering these things. I went to the University of Wisconsin and got a degree in psychology, an undergraduate degree, and then I was working on a master's degree of criminology at the University of California at Berkeley, and I began having, in my early 20s, a series of psychic experiences, precognitive dreams. And I wanted to know, well, what does this mean? And I went to my faculty members and began asking them, and I quickly learned they had nothing intelligent to say about it. So I resolved that I'd have to become my own expert if I wanted to learn anything. And it was time for me to shift from studying negative forms of human deviance to looking at the positive forms of human deviance. So I was guided by dreams, literally, to... my dreams led me to develop a career in the radio. Back in 1972, I started my first radio program for KPFA in Berkeley, and that led me to create a unique, individual, interdisciplinary doctoral degree program in parapsychology at Berkeley.
Let me just ask you, did you, in your criminology study, were you studying things like the pathologies of serial killers, or was it just more basic forensics?
Mostly I was doing psychotherapy with rapists and murderers in San Quentin prison.
No fun.
Yeah.
Oh, my.
Well, Fiorella, did you have a bit more, I said, not as kind of a gloomy start to your career? I mean, how did you get into astronomy? Were you looking up as a child one night and just overwhelmed by all the stars, or what?
It was a summertime. My grandmother in Italy, just outside Milan, we were walking every single night, and she was making up fables and stories using stars. So that was my beginning.
And did you have, when you first wanted to explore astronomy, did you read up on Galileo or Copernicus, or
No,
and were there any females in your field that were heroines, or?
No, I just started to look at this beautiful picture of the moon. I didn't understand very much what it was, but it was amazing. It was enchanting just to look to this object. And then later on I had Barbarella guiding me.
Barbarella, yeah.
What led you to acoustic astronomy specifically, though? Does that come out of a natural blend from your musical background, or what led you to think in that direction?
Just studying at the Conservatorio during nighttime at the Corsi Popolari. We were studying frequency of the musical note and intensity. And then in the morning I was studying radio astronomy, and again the professor goes on intensity and frequency. Immediately there is the combination, musical note, radio waves, same parameter, intensity and frequency, and that was the beginning. The association of being able to transform somehow these radio waves into sound. But then I was lucky because at that time computer music was starting to arise.
Right.
So I captured that and I looked for the right software, and that was the beginning.
Well, let me,
timing.
In this last segment, I sort of want to do a miscellaneous, so I'll go back and forth between you and ask several questions. Let me ask Jeffrey, in your lifetime, what aspect of, say, unexplained phenomena do you hold the hope for being best, having some evidence come forth? Do you think that it'll be in the psychic research, psychokinesis, ghosts, hairy bipeds, lake monsters? Do you think that, if you were to say in the next 30 years, if one of these things is going to come out of sort of the recesses of, psi phenomena into a genuine scientific study, which do you think has the best shot?
Extrasensory perception.
Yeah.
Telepathy, precognition, and clairvoyance. We've been researching this now for 120 years. We have thousands of case studies, thousands of experiments. It's probably one of the best kept secrets in the world. Largely the research has been kept out of general circulation in universities because I think the skeptics are just too influential, and they keep repeating their mantra that it doesn't exist. There isn't a shred of evidence, they say, but there are mountains of evidence, and I think in the coming years we'll see that people will see through the flimsiness of the skeptical arguments against this evidence.
It occurs to me, having read most of Carl Jung's work when I was in college in my 20s, I don't know why, but I ended up doing that. He wrote a wonderful book on synchronicity and some of the things that you've been talking about in parapsychology, Jung would basically say, well, of course, this makes absolutely logical sense. As an aside, he also wrote a fascinating book on flying saucers, which I encourage everyone to read. But I'm also thinking of people like Stanislav Grof, a transpersonal psychologist who came to the forefront in the 80s, partly with the development of a technique of reaching altered states to do therapy called holotropic breathwork.
Yes.
But he did a tremendous amount of work with LSD research in the 50s and 60s while it was still legal to do so. And there's that case history too. Is that going to feed into this?
Well, I think many people were awakened by their encounters with Grof's work and with Jung and certainly with LSD. The research on extrasensory perception suggests that you don't need to take LSD to experience it.
Okay.
Drugs, especially strong drugs, do not necessarily enhance extrasensory perception.
I've heard a lot of people say, though, starting with Aldous Huxley, but also including people like Timothy Leary and Terence McKenna, that entheogens or hallucinatory drugs can open that door for people who might not be able to go through the door otherwise. Is there some validity there, do you think, to this?
Yeah. There is, but the question is, which particular door are we talking about?
Yeah, okay.
Here, and I think the way I would view it is that these drugs open up your chakras.
Okay.
As you know, we have many organs of psychic perception, and the chakras is sort of a Hindu way of thinking of them as doorways into mythical or metaphysical realities of the psyche, into the realm that the Aborigines in Australia might call the dream time.
Well, let me then tie this back to Fiorella, because I know Art had mentioned that Fiorella Terenzi, you were friends with Dr. Timothy Leary, correct?
Yes. Actually, I encourage you to play a song we did together that touches on this subject, called The One Brain.
Okay.
It's also available on MP3 and mp3.com and emusic.com.
Okay.
But yes, I did work with Timothy Leary, and he saw a gigantic coincidence between the gigantic brain of the universe and our brain.
Well, let me ask, too, because Timothy Leary is a good example of it. I think his persona, I'm not an expert on it, but he's one of those people that when you just say the name, you get sort of a negative connotation. I'm just wondering what the effect of personae is in science or even, psi phenomena. How much is someone's good or bad reputation affect how it's whatever they perceive? I mean, I could be a great researcher and have faultless evidence that I present, but if I am thought of a little wary, and I just read a book on the geology war between Cope and Marsh back in the 19th century, the two great dinosaur fossil hunters. One of them had a better reputation than the other. Marsh had a much better reputation, and he got a lot more credit than Cope did in his lifetime. I'm just wondering, how does someone like a Leary or any other scientist that maybe is looked at askance, how do you overcome those personal biases?
Probably you don't overcome. I mean, it is the way it is. A bad reputation, unfortunately, is like that. I don't think it applies to Dr. Leary, because I think actually he has a good reputation among a very large group of people, internationally speaking. Mm-hmm. But you see also there is always, a price to pay, even to be a woman. Trust me, it's not that easy. Mm-hmm. I mean, if I look to my research of acoustic astronomy in 1987, I mean, I paid a price because I was young. I didn't look like a stereotype scientist, so there is always a price to pay, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask this, too. Both Art and I write poetry, and a lot of times in contemporary poetry of the last 10 or 20 years, there are certain groups, for example, there's a group of poets called Nuyorican poets that I think practice a technique, what I call willful marginalization, is that they are on the outside, but they kind of like claiming to be oppressed and on the outside, and they get off on it, kind of. I'm just wondering, I found when I read through various Fortean books and whatnot, it seems to me that there are a lot of groups, especially, let's say, like Bigfoot researchers, that seem to sort of take a kind of perverse pride in being dismissed. I'm just wondering if you've encountered that Jeffrey, that when you've not only are skeptics a problem, but some of the true believers are so wrapped up in their true beliefs that they hinder people like you that might, want to shoot down the middle.
Well, sure, that's true, but what you said reminds me of maybe a deeper philosophical point, and I think the case is that we're all on the outside. Mm-hmm. Existential philosophy talks about, the fundamental alienation of human beings. We're born naked, and then, we die.
Was it Hobbes? That's sort of the Hobbesian thing. Our lives are nasty, short, and brutish.
Yeah, and recently, what do we have? People on the conservative right wing who are at the center of power now in the United States government, complaining that they're outsiders. It's universal.
Yeah. Well, as we've only got about 5 more minutes or so for our show, let me just ask Jeffrey, and then I'll end with Fiorella. What are your current projects? I know Thinking Aloud went off the air a few years ago. Do you hope to get back into television or radio? Or are you on, do you have any current projects going?
Well, I do have some proposals out to do some more new work in television, and my latest project, as I mentioned before, is the creation of visual art. Mm-hmm. And I'm always doing things. I have lots of irons in the fire.
Mm-hmm. Where would you? I mean, when at the end of your life, if people look back and someone were to write a biography of Jeffrey Mishlove, I mean, what do you want to be known for the most? Opening up people to the ideas that there are things beyond hard empirical science. Is that something?
Gosh, I hope that people would remember me as somebody who was filled with love. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line for me.
And how about Fiorella? Now that do you have any more CDs or music? I know that I read a year or two ago you're on tour. Mm-hmm. Do you plan to do that for the next few years, going around? And are there any new, for example, there are all these heavenly bodies, weird things being discovered. I mean, do you look forward to, finding that X object that's going to really, be a good coda for, a song or something?
Yes, I always look for celestial partner to compose music with. I have a couple of cosmic drummer. One is the Crab Pulsar, and the other one is the Vela Pulsar, and they are playing together in a couple of tracks I'm doing for a new DVD, which will have space graphics and celestial journeys, music, some tutorials, some educational. So I hope to be able to put together a concert that goes along with the DVD, and of course in doing so to keep on inspiring people worldwide to look up.
Well, let me just ask you, as far as sales figures or in your concert tours, I mean, were you playing to, 5,000, 10,000 seat venues? Did you sell 100,000, 500,000 CDs? Do you know the figures?
Yes, I do, of course. The one with Thomas Dolby, The Gate to the Mind's Eye, where I sing Quantum Mechanic and Neo. It was a billboard. On the billboard, it came at top 11. Wow. In the video.
Oh, right.
But Quantum Mechanic and Neo are a wonderful, or high computer graphics video. Mm-hmm. So, it's not bad. Sometimes it's okay, sometimes not so bad. But, you like doing it, so I don't care that much about the sales figure at the very, very end.
Well, we want to thank you both for being with us. We've been interviewing Dr. Fiorella Terenzi and Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. Thank you both for being on the program with us. This has been a wonderful conversation.
And next month we're going to have a show on poetry and have some combative poets on. But I would encourage people to check out both Jeffrey's websites and Fiorella's. www.fiorella.com is Fiorella Terenzi's website, and you can find Jeffrey's websites at www.intuition.org and also www.mishlove.com and also www.thinkingaloud.com if you want to find out about his old PBS series. And again, thanks to both of you, and hopefully good luck to both of you in your work, and we'll hear see our readers, or our readers will hear us next month. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Bye-bye. Ciao.